that we're moving from the knowledge economy to the allocation economy. And actually the main skill sets now are going to be people's ability around implementation, largely, to manage very complex language models of artificial and of human intelligence together. Now that's a huge new skill set for people to develop.
Hello and welcome back to the Innovation Room, a podcast where we sit down and talk with researchers, authors, leaders, innovators, and a bunch of other fascinating people about the tools, strategies, and tactics for taking our innovation efforts further. This episode is brought to you by Hype Innovation. I'm Colin Nelson, your host of today's episode, and I was delighted to be joined today by Natalie Turner. Now, Natalie is the author of the award-winning book, Yes, You Can Innovate, Discover Your Innovation Strengths and Develop Your Creative Potential. She's also a contributing author to Unleash Your Voice, Powerful Public Speaking for Every Woman. She's the inventor of the 6 Eyes of Innovation, a model that helps people measure their innovation strengths and achieve greater impact from their new ideas. With a background in marketing strategy, organizational development and innovation, Natalie's worked across corporate innovation and has been an entrepreneur and a business owner in the UK and Asia. As the CEO of the NVO network, she's worked and consulted for some of the world's leading organizations, including GSK, Leo Pharma Asia, Kellogg's, Danone, Cisco Systems, helping them to build their innovation systems, culture, capabilities, as well as generating new ideas to help them grow their teams and businesses. So without further ado, please join me in our conversation with Natalie Turner. So welcome, Natalie. Delighted to have you with me on the Innovation Room today. I think you're one of my oldest friends from the innovation industry, actually. I was trying to think about when we first met, and it must have been about 16 or 17 years ago, I believe, in London. I think you were presenting at an innovation event that I was at. And we've known each other for a very long time. So it's great to have you join me on the podcast and start talking and having a bit of chat about innovation. How are you today? Are you well? Where are you calling in from, to start off with?
Yeah, I'm very well today. The sun is shining. I'm in Lisbon. I live just south of Lisbon in Portugal. And we're well into spring, if not even summer already. So yeah, it's gorgeous. I'm feeling very good today.
I'm very jealous, very, very jealous as I look out my window and it's grey and miserable just outside of London here in the UK. So Natalie, obviously I've known you for an awful long time. I'm not entirely sure how you found yourself into the innovation industry. Maybe you can tell everybody a little bit about your background and how you first entered this weird and wonderful space of innovation and working with organizations on innovation and your methodology. We'll talk about that in a second, but firstly, a little bit about you and your background. How did you find your way into this world?
Yeah, I think it was a sort of an accidental stumble into the world of innovation in a way. Although, I think when you look back over your career and over your life, you sort of see a thread, don't you, of that's pulled you towards particular types of roles and experiences. But I suppose really the business side of innovation, moving into that, came when I started working for a small boutique consultancy after I finished my master's degree at the London School of Economics. And I had done courses around sort of social psychology and media and change and all of that area. So I was very interested in that space. And I worked for a small boutique consultancy, and we were looking at new markets for learning and education and how technology was going to transform that space. And we're talking a long time ago, so we're talking about CD-ROMs, intranets, all of that type of thing. And that was really my first foray into looking at what's new, what's emerging, what's coming up, how's it changing and transforming how we live, how we work. After that, I did a few other roles, but I went into one role at British Telecom. And that was a very interesting one too, because I was hired to work in card services. I don't know if you remember, like BT Charge Card.
Sadly, I do. Sadly, I'm old enough to remember that. But yes.
Yeah, and I was a strategic analyst, and so I was hired to look at what's the future, what's coming up, and I was attending all these conferences around mobility and internet and stuff like that. And I thought, well, Charge Card is not going to be around for very long. telecom. And so I started looking on the intranet for new roles in BT and ended up in this department called Internet and Multimedia Services, IMS, which was about, it was just a tiny group of people at that time. Yeah. And, and I went into that, and and obviously that became really, really big, and it became British Telecom in a way. So those were two sort of significant roles. And there were two others, I suppose, that helped to shape a lot of my journey. One was working in Germany, actually, in an incubator called Magic Cat. And we were responsible, I was a consultant, and we were responsible for generating new business ideas for this big engineering firm that would be sort of spun out as ventures. And I went with one of the ventures, which was in the whole area of human psychology and value systems around work. And so I worked with a psychologist, work psychologist, to help develop a whole instrument called the Spony profiling model. So that was very interesting in terms of the people side. The people side, the technology side, were all starting to fuse and merge for me. And then I suppose the last significant role I had before setting up my own business was working for Research International, and I was in their innovation division called 1520, and it was there that I really got into design thinking, facilitation, creative thinking, ideation, proposition development, all of that space. So they were sort of some significant my career journey, I suppose, around the innovation area.
It's funny, you can see that thread, can't you? I always ask people that I work with who are involved in the innovation industry, how did you end up here? And it's never a linear path, right? It's never that, I went to college and I studied innovation and I went and became a corporate innovator. Well, it never is like that. And I think that's the power of having that diverse career journey, is that you pick up these different bits along the way, and it starts, if you're of a particular mindset, which clearly you are, it tends to drag you in that direction. And it's funny, you and I were together a couple of weeks ago at a conference in Germany. We're surrounded by innovators. And one of the things I notice is how similar everybody is. Yes. Everybody gets along in a very open, collaborative group. Now, one of the things that I've always been inspired by is your methodology, the 6 I's of innovation. And I think that, again, that was the first experience I have of meeting you all those years ago. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that methodology, the book that you wrote, and how that manifests itself through your work today.
Yeah, again, a big part of the journey, I suppose, because I never realized, as one rarely does, what would come out of an idea. And it's interesting, isn't it, when you look back over it, you think, wow, would I have gone this path had I known? But absolutely. I mean, it's been an amazing journey. I think what initially sort of inspired the whole development was when I was working actually at 1520 in design thinking facilitation, because I was noticing that, we would always come up with these amazing ideas, with clients, with creative consumers, with, lots of stimulus, lots of things flying around, develop up great propositions, but a lot of them were getting lost back in the organizations, or they didn't have maybe formal ways of managing the idea flow. And I got more into thinking, well, what are some of the challenges around why this is the case? And unbeknown to me, I think, because back then, and we're talking 2004, 2006, I stepped my toes into the world of organizational development and leadership development, and the whole really the people and organizational cultural space. Because I think so many issues of why we find innovating difficult are to do with people, they're to do with culture, they're to do with organizational structures, they're to do with management systems, and they're rarely actually to do with the ideas themselves. And right. So that was really the initial spark. And so off I went on my hero's journey, left the corporate world, set up the NPO network back in 2006, and thought, oh, well, everybody's going to understand this, aren't they? And, it's interesting, even now we're in 2024, I still find it's an educational thing. You're talking about innovation in a far broader scope and capacity than just ideas and creative thinking. So that really inspired the idea of creating a model, because I went looking for models that I could work with clients. And most things that I came across were very technological driven or research and development driven, product. And obviously we know innovation is so much more than product development, particularly these days. We're far more into business model innovation, services, processes, systems, and other things. And that innovation isn't just about the innovation team. It's about a company-wide activity about people thinking differently and doing different stuff in their day job. So that's what really initiated the idea of, okay, let me create something that I think pulls together all these disparate, multi-layered, multifaceted elements around the innovation journey. So we have like the 6 stages of innovation. And I call these, and these are the 6 I's: identify, ignite, investigate, invest, implement, and improve. I have purpose at the center of the model because I think purpose-centered innovation, and back then, obviously, we were talking about, a little bit about sustainability, but now, obviously, it's huge, isn't it? And everywhere we're thinking about how do we drive more purpose and more sustainability and thinking about the impact of what we're innovating and what we're bringing into the world. And then we have the 2 triangles that link purpose to each of the I's. And these are really important because they reflect the processes that we build in our environments to enable us to innovate across each of the I's, and also the cultural environment that we stimulate for the people we're working with, collaborating, creating great teams that can actually diversely bring all their different ideas together. So that's very top level on the model, Colin.
But that's great. I mean, what I love about this is you address the point about the fact that it's not really about the ideas, it's about the organization, the structures that we have. And the variety of different innovation work we can be involved with. I was with an organization just yesterday where we were talking about the 10 types of innovation and how often we focus very, very narrowly on these things. And you're right, it's still an education process. So even though you and I have been in this industry an awful long time, it still feels like sometimes I'm having the same conversation again and again and again, because the general knowledge of what actually makes organizations agile and innovative and self-sustaining is just not common knowledge. But I wanted just to sort of take a slight sidestep based on something you mentioned about the fact an awful lot was organization design and leadership teams, and whether you find that most of your work is with people that have never innovated, that are trying to learn what this means at a sort of senior level of an organization, or whether you're dealing with people who are working in innovation, are simply trying to get better at it, and whether I see this disconnect between executive teams and innovators, and I'm wondering which is your primary audience for what you're talking about. Is it the people that don't know anything, or is it the people that do know but they need to get better at what they do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I would say predominantly we're brought in to work in organizations that are struggling with, well, what is this? What does this mean to us? What is innovation? And how do we create a climate and an environment for people to also understand how they contribute their own personal skills and strengths? And that's a big part of what I've designed, which is a profiling system around the 6 I's, where people can answer a questionnaire, and it gives them a flavor of how they see their self-perception of their skill set around the journey of the 6 I's. And I think that's been the big pull for organizations, because there's lots of models and sort of assessments out there which are more psychologically driven, like what type of innovator might you be from a motivational perspective or a psychological values perspective, but this is skills based. So a lot of the time I think we're brought in because organizations are trying to upskill their workforce. They're trying to help people understand that innovating is a journey. It's got lots of different facets to it. Lots of different diverse skills are required to make innovation happen. And that can be pulled in different ways. So some of it is straight training programs, which we apply the model on challenges. And I think that's where it gets really interesting, where people learn about, well, what is innovation? And let me innovate, let me do stuff, let me create on real live issues and challenges in the organization. And then other times it can be more around just straight training programs, or consultancy practices, or over a period of time. So, for example, we've been working on a big leadership development program with executives. Now, all of these executives are very seasoned people,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily see themselves as the innovators of the
Right.
organization.
Somebody else's
They're
job.
leading,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
they're leading. They're leading their
Yeah.
divisions.
Yeah.
So it's about helping them understand, well, what does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be leading innovation in your different area? And how are you going to drive that in your departments, in your divisions, across the space? So yes, I would say it's mostly in that area, in upskilling, mindset development, cultural development, people development. But with also linking it to outcome, so what are we trying to innovate? What are we
It's
bringing into
critical,
the
right?
world? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things, well, I guess from the work that I do, and I think this is possibly some in your world, is that an awful lot of the organizations that are really grappling with this are typically medium to large organizations. They're often multinationals with people all over the world. And these are the organizations that are desperately trying to be more agile, but just struggling to get improve their innovation performance. And it's very different than talking to a startups where it's innovate or die really in their
Yeah.
world. But because they're complex, they're large, they're multinationals, they have people in all kinds of different corners of the world. And I know that you base your business out of Asia for quite some time. And I was wondering what sort of cultural differences you've seen perhaps with leadership groups in terms of how they embrace or not, on how they think about innovation when you compare perhaps the Western world to especially the Far East. And within the work that I've done, I've seen very big differences between perhaps my hierarchical cultures and what that means when it comes to an innovation conversation, and less hierarchical cultures. And I wondered from you were in Asia for a long time, so I wonder what you learned from that and what you observed.
Mm. Well, yeah, it's a really interesting space. I mean, I lived there for nearly 13 years, both in Singapore and in Malaysia, and worked extensively across the region. Well, the first thing that really hit me after leaving Europe, and that was in 2010, so just after the global financial crisis. Actually, it was Asia that called me. It was that I got invited to speak at a leadership conference in Singapore on innovation, and obviously leaving dreary London and everything was like closing down, particularly in this space. I was like, oh my goodness, this is just on fire. I mean, people were so hungry and interested, and I had like 20 odd meetings in just a couple of days, and people were like, well, can we talk to you? Can we talk to you? Can we come in? Can you come in?
Yeah.
And actually, my whole speaking career started there because I kept getting invited to do speeches all the time. So I think, first of all, there's a massive hunger for innovation and for understanding what innovation means in a bigger sense, not just the creative aspects. I think because there is cultural differences, particularly in larger organizations. So, for example, we work a lot with the Singapore government. There's they put a lot of investment into upskilling right across all their agencies. So everybody goes through sort of innovation type programs to help them to understand what innovation might mean. I think, that in some of the sort of more multinationals that I worked with, there is a sense because there is a lot of more deference to leadership and to hierarchy. If you get a great leader behind this, everyone jumps into line, to support it. I think in the Western world, because you have so many sort of dissenting voices around, where people are going to go, and so individualism is so high in our culture that that you don't have that so much. Obviously there is a rise in that as well. But I think one of the great upsides of the more collectivist type views around innovating is it's not just about hierarchy. It's about a sense of what is good for the whole. Rather than just for the individual, what is good for us as a society, what is good, for, the collective response. So I would say they have been two of the big things I saw. One was the hunger, and I think that is still there. And particularly if you look in countries like Vietnam, for example. I also did quite a lot of work in Cambodia. There's this real sort of, what is this? And there's a hunger for education. I think there's more about tell us, explain to us, help us to understand this, more than, say, the consultancy aspect, which I think you get more over in the Western world. And then the other aspect, I think, is around really bringing people together to solve things that are going to actually affect the
Mm.
whole rather than just the individual.
I think that's fascinating, and that mirrors some of my experiences as well. Where if you have that passionate leader in a more of a collective society culture, they really can drive a huge amount of enthusiasm for innovation.
Mm,
But getting the sort of bottom up stuff to bubble without that leadership seems to be a little bit more challenging in
yeah.
Asia. So there is those interesting differences. And like you say, as globalization takes hold, these sort of things are becoming more similar. But fascinating to hear those observations. I wonder how you see the key challenges for innovators today, and maybe how the innovation landscape's changed. I'm constantly fascinated just to see what people are grappling with, what they
Mm,
think are the biggest challenges for actually making what they want to come to life. Because I think it has changed over the years, and pace of change, for example, is so
mm.
overwhelming for some sectors specifically. That's sort of making people scratch their heads. But how do you see it? What do you think the biggest challenges are for your average innovator today, compared to perhaps how it
Yeah.
was maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, when I wrote my book, Yes, You Can Innovate, back in 2018, I often think about that title now, and I think I would have called it "Yes, You Must Innovate." There's this
Yeah,
there's this thing about, obviously we can, and we have to. People have to understand that actually innovation is far more than just a small sort of niche area.
mm,
But I think if we're looking to empower and enable people more generally, then there is this imperative actually to upskill people's ability to be able to, identify opportunities and create new ideas and help to bring them to life, whether they're more entrepreneurial or they're within larger organizations. I think, what I see sort of as three big challenges. I think the first one is obviously technological change and
yeah,
artificial intelligence, as we were learning on at the Innovate conference too. And, we really have to know and be up to speed with the change of, what's going on in that landscape, and know
yeah.
what does that mean to us, or what does it mean to our organizations, how we work. How are we going to take advantage of new technologies, but also how are we going to shape how we use them? I think is one of the biggest challenges. And roles are changing so fast and so significantly. I read a really good article the other day, and it was about, that we're moving from the knowledge economy to the allocation economy. And actually, the main skill sets now are going to be people's ability around implementation, largely to manage very complex language models of artificial and of human intelligence together. Now, that's a huge new skill set for people to develop. So I think that's one of the big areas. I think the second area, and it links closely to that, is around us as ethical beings, if you like, and purpose is very important. Sustainability, why we're innovating, because as we know, there is so much downside to what is being created as much as an upside. And how we really use and implement all these new technologies, and how humans choose to do things, is going to be very important. So I think ethics is actually going to rise as a big substantial area in leadership in particular. And I think the third area is really around environment and culture, because we have to have fast, agile, responsive environments. It's not just about the individual being good at something, going back to this whole Asian sort of philosophy too. It's
Mm,
about, how is the system good? How is the system responding and creating an environment where people can flourish, where their skills can be contributed, and to create that sort of innovation culture across the whole piece of the journey of innovation, not just the creative culture, but the strong implementation culture. I think implementation is going to be the skill set. Influence and implementation are going to be the two big skill sets, I think, around
mm.
innovation more and more going into the future.
I think that's really fascinating, and I love that. A couple of quick observations on it. I think you and I saw Linklaters, the law firm, speak a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that struck me is that they put every employee through artificial intelligence training. And
Yeah.
that's the first time I'd heard an organization say something like that. And it really opened my minds up to say, yes, we have a big education job for our
Mm.
employee base to help them understand this new technology and how it changes potentially everything. And
Yeah.
alongside that, the ethical piece, which is going to become critical. As you saw, I spoke with the United Nations on stage at that same conference, and we were talking a lot about ISO and the standardization of
Mm.
innovation, and whether we can put some structures in place to help with some of the things that we're talking about. But the other part of the conversation I've had with them is very much on the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how they fit and complement and support and interact with the innovation world. Because in many cases, organizations are trying to use these innovation tools and methods like
Mm.
yours to help achieve a more sustainable world and enterprises. And so all of these things are kind of moving at once, and I think
Yeah.
picking a path through that is really interesting. And I think I see organizations grappling it as you do. Just a point on the technology side of things. Does the rise of AI excite you? Do you think it's an opportunity? Is it something that you see as a big supercharger for innovation, or do you have more concerns? I've
Mm.
heard both arguments, and I wonder where you land.
Yeah. Well, being the optimist, I see things as, hopefully a big positive shift for being able to deal with very, very complex challenges that we're facing, on the earth, and as humans, and as an ecosystem of sentient beings. So I think that there is a massive potential, but I do think there's a massive dark side as well to what we have created. It was really interesting. I was watching the film Ex Machina the other
Oh
night. I don't
yeah,
know if you've seen that.
yeah,
And
I
that was
have. Yeah,
made 10 years ago, would you believe? And and I was thinking, wow, what foresight. And there was a part of me that was quite, are we going to go that route? Is it going to become like that? But
feels
yeah,
pretty
so there's,
close. It feels
yeah,
really
I know.
close.
I know. Now, and of course, AI, in the
Yeah,
sense of it being more public, wasn't around really until November last year in terms of ChatGPT and other things like that. Obviously, it's been around for years and years, but in terms of taking off and hitting a critical mass, and how fast it is changing.
yeah.
I find it's awesome. I mean, in terms of your efficiency and productivity, and how it can change, it becomes like your team in a way,
Yeah.
and high level order thinking. You're not just talking about automation of processes here. We're talking about intelligence. So I think being able to tap into a huge intelligence and use that for hopefully the positive good, then that is great. But I do think there is a very dark shadow side to everything as well. And that's why we need the ethics.
Yes,
Otherwise,
agreed.
and the regulation and the whole sort of systems, and everything is so old. Everything we have in our societies is so legacy and old. How is it going to keep up with all these different things that are changing? So
I love that. It's exciting, it's inspiring, but it's also exhausting when you really think
yeah.
about it. And I think if you try and put yourself like you say, in a maybe more traditional industry, in a more legacy kind of structure, and start to get a handle on this, it's exhausting to think about where
Mm.
does this go. But I think those observations are very fair, and I share them too. It's amazing, and that Ex Machina movie, like you say, we're not far away from that. I was watching the Blade Runner 2049 movie, and they were showing the hologram of Elvis, and of course now in London we have hologram ABBA as a permanent
Yeah.
installation, and that was not, the distance between those two things was not large.
Yeah.
So yes, whatever you see in the movies, folks, it's coming sooner than you think. Natalie, it's been so good to talk to you. I feel like we could talk all day about these topics. For people that want to know more about you and more about your writing and your work, where can they find you? Where should they look?
Okay, a couple of websites. Obviously, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I just put Natalie Turner in there. You'll find me
You'll find
somehow.
you. Yeah.
My book site is yesyoucaninnovate.com. So that's got information about the book. My speaker site is natalie-turner.net. And around the 6 I's and the model, it's 6-I-innovation.com. So you've got all sorts of information on there. I do a free masterclass you can subscribe to, and you can get a video about the 6 I's. And you can also get the profile online as well. So, and there's lots of information around what we do.
Fantastic. And I highly recommend reading the book. It's a great stuff. And you've been inspiring me for most of my innovation career. So thank you so much for sharing those insights.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for watching or listening this episode of the Innovation Room. This wraps up our section for today. All the links and resources shared by Natalie throughout the episode will be linked down in the show notes or the video description on Parent where you're taking this content. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, please leave a review, or if you're watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing. Feel free to leave us any comments, questions, or ideas about this episode down below. We would love to hear what you think. Thank you again for listening, and see you next time.